Well, good morning and welcome to Tuesdays with the Pilgrim as we continue reading Harold Bell Wright's book, The Shepherd of the Hills, with Chapter 16, On the Way Home. Not until the party was breaking up and he saw Sammy in the doorway did young Matt go back to the house. When they had ridden again out of the circle of light, and the laughter and shouting of the guests was no longer heard, Sammy tried in vain to arouse her silent escort, chatting gaily about the pleasures of the evening. But all the young man's reserve had returned. When she did force him to speak, his responses were so short and cold that at last the girl too was silent. Then, manlike, he wished she would continue talking. By the time they reached Compton Ridge, the moon was well up. For the last 2 miles, Sammy had been watching the wavering shafts of light that slipped through the tremulous leaves and swaying branches. As they rode, 1,000 fantastic shapes appeared and vanished along the way, and now and then, as the sound of their horses' feet echoed through the silent forest, some wild thing in the underbrush leapt away into the gloomy depths. Coming out on top of the narrow ridge, the brown pony crowded closer to the big white-faced sorrel, and the girl, stirred by the weird loveliness of the scene, broke the silence with an exclamation.
"Oh, Matt, ain't it fine? Look here."
She pointed to the view ahead.
"Makes me feel like I could keep on a-goin' and never stop."
The man, too, felt the witchery of the night. The horses were crowding more closely together now, and leaning forward, the girl looked up into his face.
"What's the matter, Matt? Why don't you talk to me? You know it ain't true what them folks said back there."
The sorrel jerked further away. "It's true enough, so far as it touches me," returned the man shortly. "When are you going to the city?"
"I don't know," she replied. "Let's don't talk about that tonight. I don't want to even think about it, not tonight. You don't believe what they was a-saying, Matt. You know you don't. You mustn't ever believe such as that. I would never get along without you and Aunt Molly and Uncle Matt, nohow."
The brown pony was again crowding closer to his mate. The girl laid a hand on her companion's arm.
"Say you don't blame me for what they said, Matt. You know I wouldn't do no such thing even if I could. There mustn't be anything ever come between you and me. Never, never. I want us to always be like we are now. You been so good to me ever since I was a little tick, and you whipped Lem Wheeler for teasing me. I don't guess I could get along without knowing you was around somewhere," she finished with a half-sob.
It was almost too much. The man swung around in his saddle, and the horses, apparently of their own accord, stopped. Without a word, the big fellow stretched forth his arms, and the girl, as if swept by a force beyond her control, felt herself swaying towards him. The spell was broken by the trampling of horses and the sound of loud voices. For a moment they held their places, motionless, as if rudely awakened from a dream. The sound was coming nearer. Then young Matt spoke. "Is Wash Gibbs and his crowd from the still? Ride into the bush, quick!" There was no time for flight. In the bright moonlight they would have been easily recognized, and a wild chase would have followed. Leaving the road, they forced their horses into a thick clump of bushes, where they dismounted to hold the animals by their heads. Scarcely had they gained this position when the first of the crowd reached the spot where they had been a moment before. Wash Gibbs was easily distinguished by his gigantic form, and with him were 10 others riding 2 and 2, several of whom were known to young Matt as the most lawless characters in the country. All were fired by drink, and were laughing and talking, with now and then a burst of song or vulgar jest. "I say, Wash," called one, "what'll you do if young Matt's there?" The unseen listeners could not hear the leader's reply, but those about the speaker laughed and shouted with great glee. Then the 2 in the bushes distinctly heard the last man in the line ask his companion, "Do you reckon he'll put up a fight?" and as they passed from sight, the other answered, "Wash don't aim to give 'em no show." When the sounds had died away, young Matt turned to the girl. "Come on, we gotta keep 'em in sight." Sammy held back.
"Oh, Matt, don't go yet. We must not. Didn't you hear what that man said? It's you they're after. Let's wait here till they're long gone."
"No, 'tain't. They ain't a-wantin' me," the big fellow replied, and before the young woman could protest further, he lifted her to the saddle as easily as if she were a child. Then, springing to the back of his own horse, he led the way at a pace that would keep them within hearing distance of the company men.
"Who is it, Matt? Who is it, if it ain't you?"
asked the girl. "Don't know for sure yet, but I'll tell you pretty soon." They had not gone far when young Matt stopped the horses to listen intently, and soon by the sound he could tell the party ahead had turned off from the ridge road and were following the trail that leads down the eastern side of the mountain. A moment longer the mountaineer listened, as if to make sure. Then he spoke. "Them devils is a-goin' to the ranch after Dad Howitt. Sammy, you gotta ride hard tonight. They won't hear you now, and they're a-gettin' farther off every minute. There ain't no other way, and I know you'll do it for the old man. Get home as quick as you can, and tell Jim what's up. Tell him I'll hold him till he gets there." Even as he spoke, he sprang from his horse and began loosening the saddle girths.
"But Matt," protested the girl, How can you get by them? How are you going to get there in time?"
"Down the mountain shortcut," he answered, as he jerked the heavy saddle from the horse and threw it under some heavy brush.
"But they'll kill you. You can't never face that whole crowd alone."
"I can do it better than Dad, and him not a-looking for 'em." Slipping the bridle from the sorrel, he turned the animal loose, and removing his coat and hat, laid them with the saddle. Then to the girl on the pony he said sharply, "Go on, Sammy! Why don't you go on? Don't you see how you're a-losing time? Them devils will do it for Dad Howitt like they done for old man Lewis. Your father's the only man that can stop 'em now. Ride hard, girl, and tell Jim to hurry. And goodbye, Sammy." As he finished, he spoke to her horse and struck him such a blow that the animal sprang away. For a moment, Sammy attempted to pull up her startled pony. Then young Matt saw her lean forward in the saddle and urge the horse to an even greater speed. As they disappeared down the road, the giant turned and ran crashing through the brush down the steep side of the mountain. There was no path to follow, and with deep ravines to cross, rocky bluffs to descend or scale, and in places wild tangles of vines and brush and fallen trees, the trip before him would have been a hard one even in the full light of day. At night it was almost impossible, and he must go like a buck with the dogs on his heel. When Sammy came in sight of her home, she began calling to her father, and as the almost exhausted horse dashed up to the big gate, the door of the cabin opened, and Jim came running out. Lifting his daughter from the trembling pony, he helped her into the house, where she sobbed out her message. At the first words, "Wash Gibbs," Jim reached for his cartridge belt, and by the time Sammy had finished, he had taken his Winchester from its brackets over the fireplace. Slipping a bridle on his horse that was feeding in the yard, he sprang upon the animal's back without waiting for a saddle. "Stay inside the cabin, girl, and put out the light, and don't open the door till I come home," he said, and he was gone. As Sammy turned back into the house, from away down in Mutton Hollow, on the night wind, came the sound of guns. And that's the end of Chapter 16. We'll continue next week with Chapter 17, What Happened at the Ranch. Until then, take care, stay safe, and God bless.